What is real? How do you define real?
You can't jump into cash. Cash is trash. What do? You get out.
Ben Hart is a Bitcoin explainer, freedom maximalist. Ben is an Elon fan and the world's oldest actively competing breakdancer.
Right.
I want to call him the breakdancing Bitcoiner, but I know there's so much more to Ben than that, like how he loves challenging the narrative. Ben is also an author and has written several books. Ben Hart, welcome to the Bitcoin Matrix podcast. How are you?
Great, Cedric. Great to be here.
Yeah, likewise.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm super excited to get into it. You actually reached out to me on August 31st, 2022, when you dropped one of your several books, this one on Bitcoin.
Awesome.
So we've been in touch for a while.
Yeah.
And I've been kind of, eyeing you as the breakdancing Bitcoiner and wanting to speak to you for that reason, because I love breakdancing. I don't do it myself, but I love hip hop.
Yeah.
I have friends who studied breakdancing. We look a little bit like doppelgangers. So my questions are kind of going to be on point here. The things that I want to start. I want to start with breakdancing here, but
I'll just get into that a little bit.
Yeah,
if you want,
start there.
Just real quick. Yeah, so I took it up late in life. I started when I was, I guess, age 54. I just a friend of mine who sponsors professional breakdancing events. He's actually my best friend from high school, and he's a Wall Street guy, and he just fell in love with breakdancing sort of in the 1980s. He just saw them hitting out there on the streets and just started doing it. And then he started sponsoring these professional breakdancing competitions. And he said, "Hey, Ben, why don't you just come? I got a big event in Philly. The best breakers in the world are going to be there. Why don't you come in and take a look at it?" So I did. And I was amazed by it, just the athleticism, and just was incredibly impressed. I mean, it was like gymnastics, but way beyond that, because it's to the music and it's different moves. And, in gymnastics, they're kind of doing the same moves all the time. And it's more just a question of execution, who can execute the best. But in breaking, it's all about originality and flavor and personality, but also the athleticism. So it's the athleticism plus the art. And so I met a guy there who, I was living in Chicago at that time, and he was one of the top breakers in the world. And his name is Shorty Brick. That was his b-boy name. And I got talking with him, and I asked him if he'd be interested in being my fitness trainer. And he said, sure. And so that's kind of how I got into it. And then I got, after a few years of just sort of doing that for fitness with Shorty, and also going to some kind of workshops and things like that, I entered a couple of competitions, just totally as a almost ranked beginner compared to these guys. And they were very welcoming. They were just, I thought one of my superpowers is that I am impervious to embarrassment. I cannot be embarrassed. So I'll just go out there and try anything. And so I did this thing. And I didn't know how they would react, but they were just very welcoming. And they just said, "Hey, why don't you come to our practice?" And that's how I kind of got into it. It actually was great, because not only was it good for fitness, and but it also got me a kind of an entrance into the inner city and interacting with people who I wouldn't interact with in normal life, in the kind of the business world. And so I like to think I have, some impact in steering these people kind of in the right direction, and giving them kind of maybe a sites beyond the inner city, and got some of them sort of like actually, building businesses out of their breakdancing career, and opening up fitness, opening up gyms and things like that. So it's been one of the things I really like is I need more motivation than just fitness to get in shape. The breaking kind of provided extra motivation. You're kind of not really paying attention to how many calories you're burning and how hard you're working, because you're just trying to sort of execute the move or trying to learn the move. And then plus there's this social aspect, and there's kind of the charitable aspect of reaching kids in the inner city and getting them, pointed away from gang life perhaps, and getting them pointed more in the right direction. And so it accomplished kind of three things.
Yeah.
The fitness, the
that's
charitable
awesome.
aspect. Yeah.
I mean, a lot there I could relate to. I love, in terms of just fitness, things that are kind of sports based or team based or social. So like you were saying, you're not even like thinking about working out. You're just kind of having fun, and you enjoy it. And you're in the flow.
Yep.
I remember when I lived in San Francisco for a couple of years, and a couple of my best friends took up breakdancing. We were all in our mid-20s and both very athletic, fit guys, but one was, a little bit tall at 6'3".
Mm-hmm.
One was maybe on the shorter side, 5'7". And they would come back like twins, like Schwarzenegger and DeVito, like just
Yeah.
the tall one would lament, like, oh, it's hard for me to kind of do a lot of the things that you do as a
Right.
break dancer. It's kind of an impediment. And so I wanted to ask you about height
Yeah.
and,
The
and
height and
and
everything.
age. I mean, because
Mm-hmm.
I would think, you said you're impervious to embarrassment, but like when you take up a new endeavor, and I think specifically with breakdancing, I mean, I feel like you're really exposed
Well, I
in
think,
terms of your skill and.
yeah. Well, I have an athletic background. Was a serious ski racer growing up and tennis player, and so I was into athletics generally. So, but what I liked about breaking is that it's all body activity. And even though it looks sort of dangerous because people are sort of doing, I'm not doing flips, but people are doing sort of dangerous moves, but it's not nearly as dangerous as ski racing. You crash, 80 miles an hour going in a ski race. And but a lot of the braking it's all body activity. So you're not just doing one repetitive motion like you are, say, with running, where you're just kind of putting a lot of pressure and wear and tear on the knee joints. With braking, it's kind of just a lot of rolling around the floor, frankly, and just kind of you're hitting all parts of the body. So you're not doing the repetitive motion, which is really bad for cartilage and that kind of thing on the knees. So
Yeah.
that's another reason I really liked it.
Did people rip on you or razz at you at all in the beginning for not being good, or did you have
Not at
background
all.
before
No,
breakdancing? Could you dance? I mean, I feel like I could dance. I don't know if
I
I could
couldn't
break
dance.
dance.
So yeah, so that was the problem with me is I had never done any kind of, like hip hop dance before. And so that was actually the hardest thing for me to kind of learn and get a hold of and figure out, like, well, what is the beat? How do you hit the beat? What exactly am I supposed to be listening for? And so, like, I was really starting almost as a child, as a baby. And of course, it's natural to them. So they were kind of having a tough time teaching it to me because they couldn't really figure out how to get me to hear the beat because it was just so natural to them. And so that was actually a big challenge. But you just keep doing it. No, they were just happy I was doing it. They're just breaking is kind of a small community. It's a relatively small, maybe there's a couple 100,000 competitive breakers worldwide or something like that. Oh, and it's going to be in the Olympics this year, by the way, in the Paris Olympics. So for the first time, breaking is in the Olympics. So that's actually a huge achievement for breaking. But it's a relatively small community, and so they're just happy when anybody is doing it and trying it. And by the way, I have not been able to get anybody my age or kind of in my peer group interested in doing it. They kind of give up after the, first couple of, really, within about 20 minutes. It's very hard to get people used into doing it. So they know that. So they're very happy that someone like me is interested in it.
Yeah, I'm inspired. I've wanted to take up breakdancing my whole life, kind of like
Mm-hmm.
maybe content creation or podcasting, and I feel like there's no reason to put it off.
No. How old are you, Cedric?
46.
Okay, yeah. So I started when I was 54.
Yeah, well, that's part of the
Yeah,
inspiration here. I mean,
yeah,
I thought we all thought we were old in our mid-20s when they took it up and behind the curve and just, what's the point? And there was a little bit of that, and so I kind of came out
yeah.
of my 20s thinking that was too late. But
A
this
lot
is
of people think
inspiring.
that.
Yeah.
In fact, a lot of people, a lot of older breakers, and I'm talking like people in their 40s, they kind of came out of retirement partly because they saw me out there. So they thought, hey, maybe I can go out there. And they even have now, it's started to be sort of a regular staple at the bigger breaking events to have an over 40 event, for the older breakers. And so to keep the older breakers involved. So, that's another aspect of it. So in a way, my involvement in it has kind of helped inspire older people to stay in it or get back in it or even maybe start.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I love
Yeah.
hip hop. I would have thought my theme music would have been hip hop based. I had to pick something
Yeah.
that really fit the
Well,
show.
New York, of course, is the home of breaking in the
Yeah, it's just
Bronx,
kind of the city just has that beat. Like all
Mm-hmm.
five boroughs, even the suburbs when I was growing up,
Yep.
it wasn't even hip hop, it was just pop. And so many of the
Yep.
artists came out of New York before, hip hop went to migrated and the beat of hip hop kind of moved on, or the heart of it. And I don't even think there's sure some great hip hop being produced now, but it's more pop to me, and it's just not
Mm-hmm.
really doesn't feel the
Mm-hmm.
same. It seems like the way rock, I mean, rock, you had indie rock after a while. Like rock itself wasn't the counterculture.
Right. But what I
And
like about the breaking is just the athleticism. I mean, that's really what attracted me to it, that it just looked like a much more fun way to get in shape and work out and then going to the gym. And, and going to the gym, I wasn't making a whole lot of progress and it was just kind of stagnating or going backwards. And so that was what, but then once I got into it, I started to appreciate much more the art aspect of it. So
right.
yeah.
It's interesting with the Olympics because that's another one I don't really, to me it's not a big seal of approval that the breakdancing is an Olympics now.
Yeah.
It's
A
almost
lot of
like,
people feel that way.
how is that an Olympic sport? Like how
Right.
you judge that? Like what's the merit? Where is this whole thing going? Like it gets a little weirder and weirder over there. Like can't
Yeah.
we just get back to rock throwing and feats of strength or
Those feats
tests
of,
of
yeah.
endurance or something? But talking, because hip hop, I guess, is more thought of as counterculture, but obviously you didn't get involved in that. But culture and counterculture keeps kind of the pendulum swings, I think, back and forth over decades
Hmm.
and maybe generations,
Yeah.
or maybe even 80-year swings. I don't know, but uh, can we go back to when you were in college?
Yeah,
Because I
sure.
would like to talk about your advertising career and some of these
Yeah, we
books
could
you've
like talk
written.
about college and whatever you want to talk about,
Sure.
Bitcoin,
Well, we'll
economics,
get
whatever.
to all of it, but I want to
Okay.
start, maybe go back to the
Yeah.
beginning. Breakdancing, I definitely want to start there. But I want to maybe because I wanted to hear about the Dartmouth Review. And
Okay.
because like then that's like, is
Right.
that counterculture? Was that and it's like weird.
It
There's
was kind of
niche
reverse. I would
counterculture
say,
to counterculture and left, right counterculture. And
well, I'll tell you what we noticed. What we noticed, and part of the reason for the paper was there was the the 60s left, the rioters on the streets, the it, the sit-ins and the protests and so forth, the rioters, they had kind of put on suits and moved into the Dartmouth faculty lounges, so so it was kind of, they went from the streets to basically the faculty lounges, and we kind of noticed that, and we also noticed that whereas the 60s left was more about freedom, the Woodstock generation, the free speech movement at Berkeley, the Berkeley Barb, and David Horowitz, who became a conservative. He was like one of the leaders of the free speech movement at Berkeley, and was the editor and I think founder and editor of the Berkeley Barb, and was a 60s radical. But he also noticed that this new generation, or what happened once they got kind of into power, was suddenly they weren't for freedom anymore. They weren't for free speech. So we started at Dartmouth, we started to kind of notice it, but we didn't really fully appreciate it. We just noticed that there wasn't any kind of publication on the campus that was talking about, kind of conservative ideas or pro freedom ideas. And we thought, we started a paper called the Dartmouth Review, which became the first, or one of the first and the most famous of the conservative sort of pro-freedom papers that began to be springing up on the campuses. And really, the Dartmouth Review was the first and made a lot of media attention. 60 Minutes did a piece on it. I was on CNN Crossfire. I debated Abby Hoffman, who was a 60s leader, on CNN's Crossfire. And so it made a lot of media attention. And the college did not like the paper. At first, we applied for funding like other student groups might, like the Republican or like the Democrat Club, or there was other papers that got funding, and basically any student group could get some kind of funding, but we couldn't. And they rejected us for funding. But we were able to get a hold of the alumni directory and do a mailing to, we put out a couple of issues of the paper, and we were able to do a mailing to all the Dartmouth alumni and ask for support for the paper. And an enormous amount of money came in. I think about 150,000, which I guess in today's dollars would probably be like 400 something thousand
like
dollars just
more.
arrived. And we basically were able to just set up a paper. We rented out offices, and we had a pretty good sized staff, and some famous people actually came out of there. You probably, Laura Ingraham, host of on Fox News. She worked on the paper, and in fact, she was about 4 or 5 years younger than me, but I remember when she arrived at the offices and it was like a blizzard out, and she came into the office and she had like a big snowsuit on, and she was under about several inches of snow, and she walked in and she says, "My name is Laura Ingraham. I came here. I'm a freshman, and I came here to work for the Dartmouth Review." So there was Laura, and there was Dinesh D'Souza, who's done a lot of movies, and other people too. So quite a few editors, Paul Gigot, who was, I think he still is the editor of the editorial page at the Wall Street Journal. So a lot of kind of talent came out of the Dartmouth Review, but the college was not at all for the paper. So in fact, they sued us to prevent us from using the Dartmouth name. They used the campus police to prevent us from distributing the newspaper to the dorm rooms, though we still managed to get it distributed. They wouldn't let us use the student mailboxes. So it was just but we were able to get the paper distributed, and a lot of the local shops. The paper was supported by donations from the alumni, but also by advertising from local merchants who basically liked the paper, and they would pile up the papers at their stores. Like the Dartmouth bookstore was run by a guy who was sort of a entrepreneur. Conservative, loved the paper, so he just had the papers stacked up there at the checkout counter, and so the paper got out, and we would distribute them to the dorm rooms. And sometimes the people distributing the paper, including myself, would be chased by the campus police, and it was quite something. So then I wrote a book called Poisoned Ivy, which came out. It was published in 1984. I actually wrote it more in like 1981, 82, but eventually got a publisher, Stein and Day. And the book really says that how the left has changed. That the left is no longer for freedom. It's not the free speech movement at Berkeley. It's sort of a new variant of totalitarianism that once they get in charge, they really don't want free speech or freedom of thought at all. And the part of the origin for this sort of what I call, back then I didn't call it woke, but it would be the origin of the sort of the woke mind virus. And it was these what I call victim studies departments. It was women's studies, Black studies, Native American studies, gay and lesbian studies, and all these sort of groups. And these departments at Dartmouth they began very small, like just a couple of professors, but these professors were very vocal, and they would organize protests. And of course, at the Women's Studies Department, they weren't admiring of Margaret Thatcher or somebody like that. They were, you had to be a certain type of woman. And if you were the type of female professor that was just basically a professor, wasn't ideological perhaps, you'd pretty much get hounded off the campus. And this actually happened to a woman Shakespeare professor of mine who I liked very much. And she was just just a straight academic, not ideological, maybe even a little bit. She was Catholic, so probably a little bit maybe right leaning, and they did not like her at all. And so she didn't get tenure. She just basically got hounded off the campus, even though she wasn't political. She just wasn't fitting in with the ideological mode of the women's studies department, because it wasn't just the women's studies department that was like that. The female professors that were being hired in the English department and the humanities departments were sort of like that too. Yeah, so we saw that trend, and that's really what the book is about: is the intolerance of the liberals, of the left, and it really is almost the origins of wokeism. Of course, the woke mind virus is much more virulent now. It's gone to such absurd lengths now, but it was something that I noticed, and a bunch of us noticed there at the campus back there in 1981.
Wow, I mean, just thinking about how long ago that is and how
Yeah.
prevalent sort of, and I think about sort of my own timeline. I mean, my parents, lifelong Democrats, New York City public school teachers. I grew up very left leaning. I think about,
Hmm.
when you mentioned the Dartmouth Review, I think about, sort of National Lampoons
Yeah, it
or
was kind of
Saturday
like
Night
it was
Live.
Cedric. It was kind of like, I'd say, it's half. One of the things it was like half sort of conservative pro freedom National Lampoon, very humorous, humor type, satire type articles. But we also had a lot of investigative reporting, and that was something that I really emphasized. Was nobody really cares what a 20-year-old thinks about politics or world events. So all the articles had to be about what was going on the campus, and we'd
Right.
send reporters to meetings and to just report what was going on the campus and investigative. There was the college dining hall scandal where there was some kind of graft going on there and kickbacks and so forth. So we dug up that, and did reports on that, and of course sent it out to the alumni and so forth. And so the paper was very Dartmouth centric. And I think that's really what made the paper very good, and that's what the alumni really liked, and really supported the paper. So that was but it was let's see. Yeah, so that was it. Yeah, and in fact, it's interesting. Like with the people who joined the paper were not necessarily conservative. So, for example, Dinesh D'Souza, when he first joined the paper, he was kind of a liberal or a neutral, and it was very critical of the Dartmouth Review. He had written an article for the daily paper, um, criticizing the Dartmouth Review. But the guy who we had basically I was sort of partners with was a guy named Greg Fawcett. There were like five of us who were co-founders. Greg Fawcett had just been fired as editor-in-chief of the regular daily Dartmouth because he'd written a sort of conservative editorial. So he got fired and kind of drummed out of the paper. And I'd wanted to start a right of center conservative pro-freedom paper, but I didn't have the I'd never worked in a newspaper before. So once he got fired from the Daily Dartmouth, I thought this is a great opportunity to start the Dartmouth Review because here's a guy who's a great writer, experienced editor. He was editor in chief of the paper. And he wanted to bring Dinesh over from the paper because Dinesh was doing really good investigative reports. And but Dinesh wasn't too thrilled about that idea because he actually wasn't conservative. In fact, he'd written a kind of attack piece on the paper. And I said, well, yeah, he's welcome to come, but he has to write, investigative pieces like the stuff that he's doing with the Dartmouth, no sort of editorials about, trashing the review. And so the first issue, the issue came out right after Dinesh had been hired, not hired, but he right after, no, we were working for free, but he joined the paper, and Greg and I had gone to the printer. We put the paper to bed. It looked great, and when the paper was printed and I got it delivered to my dorm room, the front page article was an article by Dinesh titled "Reviewing the Review," basically trashing the review. so, so I was really upset. But Dinesh just by hanging around us so much, he totally started to get it, get what we were doing, and if anything, he kind of moved to the right of me. but that was pretty. So, but we had a lot of people on there that were not conservative. Like we had a photographer who was like a Ted Kennedy supporter, definitely a Democrat. Yeah, but he liked the fact that we just gave him artistic freedom with his photography, and we'd print his photography. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I bring up National Lampoons because I also think, and Saturday Night Live, because I just think about the culture in the early 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And I think National Lampoons was affiliated or did not, like, weren't a lot of people from Harvard.
Yeah, so
And
that was a Harvard Lampoon. And actually, Animal House was written by Chris Smith, who was a Dartmouth guy. So there was some overlap between Harvard, Dartmouth, and I assume that the other schools as well. But yeah,
and a lot of them I think went from, especially maybe the Harvard Lampoon went on to like SNL.
I think so.
And
I
I
think that's
really
right. Yep.
felt like looking back on it, how much influence that had on the culture. Like, thinking sort of like these are the cool kids in the high school hallway,
Yep.
bumping everyone into the lockers. And it's
Yep.
funny. And there's some, rational, logical thought to a lot of these jokes. And they're not all political or left or
Mm-mm.
right. And, as a Bitcoin, I don't, I'm not trying to, but it's just interesting, but talking about the culture. And I would think that going into the Dartmouth Review and sort of maybe identifying as conservatives is a sort of like, you're not one of the cool kids, I would think, or maybe you're cool kids in your
Well,
stream and it's a whole different world, or I don't know
it
how
kind
that,
of depends,
like,
Cedric.
because
So
I was 4 years old in 1981. So I'm
right. Yeah.
taking
So
it
you're
as
young.
culture, like on TV, and I'm watching Chevy Chase as a little kid, and the Blues Brothers. So this is, I'm
Right.
taking it in, but like as a young adult, I'm wondering like what it was like.
Yeah. The kids actually, I would say, obviously, the opinions on the paper were divided, but it was a pretty conservative campus in terms of the student body at that time. We did a poll of the student body, and it was like when Reagan and Carter were running for president, and like 60% or some big majority of students were actually for Reagan. And the paper, we very much defended the fraternities. One of the causes that the paper defended was the fraternities, which were under attack by the liberal administration, because the fraternities are viewed as debauchery, yeah, but also kind of a hotbed of kind of um, not necessarily right wing, but conservative, more or less conservative. Uh, what would you call it? Yeah, just retrograde, they would think, behavior and so on. So, but we were very much defenders of the fraternities, and so we were very popular within the fraternity structure, which was a pretty big thing at Dartmouth. That was a
Yeah,
pretty
I
that was sort of
visited Dartmouth
yeah,
for a weekend
yeah,
as a senior, and to get into some of these frat parties, I was never really into frat life, but visiting, those were, and then these frat houses were
yeah,
amazing. I lied. I said I was on the Harvard soccer team to get into some of these parties because Harvard
yeah,
was in town,
yeah.
and that was a nice way to scam my way in. But yeah, these
Awesome.
houses and parties were impressive. Dartmouth itself, it was a beautiful campus.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say the Dartmouth Review is pretty popular actually among the students. I mean, obviously it would be divided if you're a liberal left student. Um, they wouldn't like it obviously, but we did one of the hot issues at Dartmouth was the abolition of the Indian symbol. The Indian symbol had been the symbol for Dartmouth, and so they abolished it because they said it was racist or something. And so we did a poll of Indian chiefs nationwide, what they thought of Dartmouth getting rid of the Indian symbol and whether they thought it was offensive or racist or anything. And the poll came back like 95% wanted the Indian symbol because they saw it as a symbol of honor. They want they want their culture to be remembered. And but they abolished it. The wokesters who were in charge of the administration. But there were a lot of actually Native Americans. Dartmouth was founded as a school to educate the Indians. Actually, to spread Christianity. It was Eleazar Wheelock founded Dartmouth in I don't know 17 something 17. I'm going to say 72 or something like that. And his purpose was to educate the Indians, spread Christianity to the Indians. And so that was the reason for the Indian symbol. But of course, they thought it was the powers that be there said it was racist and offensive and so on. But the Indian chiefs, the actual Indian chiefs out in the country, didn't think it was racist or offensive at all. They wanted to keep it.
Right. Well, I mean, it's so much going on with culture, and the way you kind of looked at this in the early 80s, I kind of want to get a little bit more into this, maybe not at the college level, but what are you seeing at sort of the K through 12 level? And
Oh
sort
my
of,
gosh, I probably don't know as much as I probably don't really
or maybe
fully
sort of
see
the
the full
history.
horror of it.
Well,
Yeah.
I was, or
Well, I think
maybe, yeah,
I
I
think
mean,
what's happened, Cedric, is you had the victim studies thing started as sort of little tiny departments on the at Dartmouth and other elite Ivy League colleges back in the late 70s, early 80s, and then it kind of metastasized. Then it became sort of dominant of all of college culture, and then it trickles down to the public schools and ultimately to kindergarten. And um, one of the architects of sort of modern education, modern public school education, is Bill Ayers, who was a friend of Obama, and he was a founder of the Weather Underground back in the 1960s, which was a terrorist organization. It was a violent organization. He and his people there bombed, I think, the Pentagon, a police headquarters, some other government facility, and he didn't actually, I guess, serve time in prison. I think he got off on a technicality. I guess the FBI did some illegal wiretaps, or it was ruled that way. So he got off on some sort of probation or something like that, even though he was a terrorist. And he got hired as a college professor, I think at the University of Illinois, but I might have the school wrong. But he got a $49 million grant from the Annenberg Foundation to kind of design Chicago's public schools. And so that's what he did. He designed Chicago's public schools, and we see the result of that. And he was also very friendly with Obama. They were community organizers together, and Obama's political career was launched out of Bill Ayers' living room. And when Obama was running for the state Senate, when the state Senate then became the U.S. senator and president, and the rest is history. But Bill Ayers understood that the way you change the culture over the long term is to capture the hearts and minds of young people. And if you can get them early, kindergarten, or the earlier the better, you can control the future. You can direct the future of the country because you've kind of brainwashed these kids. You get to control the curriculum and rewrite the curriculum. And of course, that was a big project of the left. There was a guy named Zinn, Professor Zinn. I can't remember his first name, but he wrote a kind of history of the
Howard Zinn?
American people. Howard Zinn, maybe it's yeah, I think it is
Yeah, I mean,
Howard Zinn. Howard Zinn.
a People's History of the
Yeah,
United States. I mean, book is cited in Good Will Hunting.
you're right. So that became kind of the textbook that the narrative that America is built on racism and conquest, and it's basically an evil country. And so that was
Right.
that
It
became
was
the
him,
narrative.
Chomsky, Naomi
Right.
Klein around that time. And
Yeah.
and I mean, I went down this rabbit hole and I still don't know what to make of a lot of those writings because I haven't gone back to fact check them,
Yeah.
or revisit them. And some things I kind of think are interesting. I'm not going to
Hmm.
refute all of it, and
Sure.
I would love to kind of, I'm not prepared for that right now, but how would you then describe what is the long march through institutions?
Well, that was actually kind of the Bill Ayers kind of model. So the long march through the institutions was, I talked about how the radicals of the 60s went from the streets to into the faculty lounges. And it was definitely a project to take over the educational institutions, because that's how you get control of the future. You get control of the education curriculum, and you shape people's minds that way. And they talked about the Long March through the institutions, and the Long March refers to Mao Zedong's Long March, when he took over China. But it was a long, brutal march, and so they were literally referring to Mao Zedong's Long March when they were talking about the Long March through our mostly educational institutions,
Yeah, and so
but
then
other institutions as well. Yeah.
yeah, that's what I was
Yeah.
gonna say. It seems like I was gonna continue your own sense, and I don't want to put words in your mouth. It seems like the thought would be like radicals to the streets, to the education, to media, and to politics.
Right. And also corporations. Now you've got these divisions, the diversity, equity, inclusion, whole corporate divisions, were set up to promote this stuff. So it's everywhere now.
And what do you make of then what's happening at Harvard with sort of uh what is it,
Claudine
plagiarism?
Gay. Yeah.
And,
So
I mean,
yeah.
this is an Ivy League school. I mean, Dartmouth is an Ivy League school.
Yeah, of course, Bill Ackman's really taken on this.
He's an
Have you been
interesting
following?
character.
He's an interesting
Yeah,
character.
I'm
Yeah, he's a
following it a little bit.
little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he's a billionaire. He's a Democrat, and I think he's
Yeah.
just stunned at how really just what's happened to Harvard, which I guess he supports a lot. He's probably given them millions and millions of dollars over the years, and so they have this president who is clearly kind of an affirmative action hire. She had no publication record. She had sort of a record of plagiarism. Really, like almost all of her publications were plagiarized, and she really had a very thin publication record. But here she is, president of Harvard. So that's what's happening.
What I think is fascinating though, and people, like Ackman, and you could throw a lot of names in here, like Michael Saylor, when they run
Hmm.
into the problems or the issues that we're either fuming over or just whatever, just avoiding or want to talk about, they have it at a different level, whether it's more public or they have more money on the line. And so I think it gets, and these guys are incredibly sharp, or at least some of them
Yeah.
are. But what I'm really, I don't want to say enjoying, because as a Bitcoiner, I've kind of been liberated from not left, right, but being on one side or the other, having a team,
Yeah. Well,
right? I like
and also,
issues.
yeah, and
And
Cedric, one of the things when I talk to people about Bitcoin, I don't like to politicize it too much, because I think Bitcoin is basically kind of a libertarian movement. But a lot of people who are leaning left, who kind of left-leaning libertarians, and there's slightly right-leaning libertarians. Like a Jack Dorsey, I would say, is a left-leaning
mm,
libertarian, right? But we want Jack Dorsey as part of the Bitcoin world. He's doing great things. So I think Max Kaiser, he puts it pretty well. He says, you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you. And I think
hmm
the more you get involved in Bitcoin, the more you start thinking about economics and philosophy and political science, and it kind of
Yep.
steers you into kind of I think one of the things about liberals, and I'm not talking about just the hard left, but liberals tend to be liberal because they are right brain dominant. They're dominated by the artistic kind of feeling side of their brain, whereas maybe conservatives are a little bit more left brain dominant, more engineering, try to make things work. And so Bitcoin really is just intense
Right.
engineering when you think about it. I mean,
And
it's
but
pretty
as
amazing.
trying to like think about it as a parent though, I kind of want to put those two together,
Hmm.
the left and the right brain.
Hmm.
And and I
Yeah, you
struggle
want
with
both.
that. I want
Yeah.
both. And then
You
I think
yeah.
that one model, and that obviously doesn't apply to everyone. It's not the best, but like one model is like, you go from that sort of like social communist to conservative libertarian to Bitcoiner, as you age through
Hmm.
life. I mean, I think there's
Right.
a,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't think I would want my kids to be like hardcore. I don't want to use the word conservative or left or right, but just hardcore against certain things right now,
Hmm.
where like everyone should be out for themselves. I'm 8 years old. You didn't
Right.
bring your fucking snack to lunch. Screw you. Like, that's not what I want for my kid right
No.
now. But like maybe
Yep.
when he's 25, I want him to take ownership of his life, when he's out of the house. And,
Hmm.
and it's like, it's an interesting but like, it's funny seeing billionaires go through this thing. And what I find interesting is
Yeah.
people who have chosen teams, and we're seeing a lot of the snake eating the tail, whichever
Yep.
team you're on. Like, you're gonna
Yeah, it's
be,
kind of a
because
vibe thing almost. It's sort of like, it's almost like a tribal vibe thing. So let's say, if you're Trump, let's say Donald Trump, just take, some of his positions. His positions are actually pretty moderate, right? I mean, he's
yeah.
sort of a spender. I mean, he's kind of a spender. He's not really, a
No, he wants to spend up
fiscal
to
restraint
wazoo, and
guy.
he wanted to lower the dollar and borrow, and I
Yeah.
mean,
I
do
mean,
lots of things. Yeah.
but if if the Democrats doing that, it's great. But if Trump is doing that exact same thing, it's not great, right? Because there's just kind of a different vibe to the teams. It's like they're almost doing the same thing.
Yeah, no, I
You
don't
know,
see the teams as, I see the teams as more like the WW. I still call it WWF, or the Harlem. I like the Harlem Globetrotters and the Washington Senators. Like, they're going to compete, and there might be, more of the fans are going to be there for the Globetrotters, but there's going to be some diehards there for the Washington Senators, and people are going to get angry, and there might even be some fistfights. But the owners own both teams, and they're
yeah,
all
yeah.
laughing to the bank,
Oh, I
right?
think
And
that's absolutely true.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's the same thing in the WWE. It's like they need a heel and they need a hero. And you can't
Hmm.
have a hero without the heel. And the heel sometimes loves playing the heel, and sometimes they don't. But like, that's a character, it's a role. You can't have heroes without the villain.
Yeah. Yeah.
And some people love the villain, and it's entertainment. And I think they use that art of age-old politics to just divide and conquer,
Right.
whether the players know they're on the same team for the owners or they're really in it, and whether it's a real food fight or a fake one.
Yeah.
I think it's all at our expense.
Well, I think
Uh,
that Bitcoin really does educate people about economics, about engineering, about I mean, there's just so many rabbit holes you can go down with Bitcoin. There's the
well, that's what
technology.
you mentioned, that
Yeah.
Howard Zinn book, though, because that felt
Yeah.
like a lot of things can feel eye-opening. And I feel
Hmm.
like with Bitcoin, what maybe being a truth seeker your whole life, Bitcoin at least had this ledger where you could say, okay, we can't argue about it. Like, it's
Right.
irrefutable. There's 21 million. There's a
Yeah.
block every X amount of, let's call it 10 minutes.
Yeah.
There's, certain reward schedule and emission schedule, and we can't argue about that. And that's what I loved about Bitcoin, because you can get into these conversations about, because I wanted to get away from politics in the sense of the team sport, but
Hmm.
life is
Right.
politics. And
Yeah.
I think of Bitcoin as non-political, but being non-political is political. And I think
Hmm.
Bitcoin at its truest essence should appeal to people on the left and the right.
Yeah.
And it's not
Well,
a refutation of either.
yeah.
Um, but it does
Sometimes
sort
they
of
tell
like
people
shed
like
light on certain things.
sometimes they tell people like, well, you might not be interested in politics, but politics unfortunately is
Is
interested in
interested in
you.
you. Yeah.
Right. So and hopefully Bitcoin is a protection from that so that it can, you know, the money printing press. I mean, I didn't really understand how serious the money printing press was. Actually, the editor of the Dartmouth Review, Greg Fossetall, when I was sort of one of my co-founders, one of the co-founders there, back then he was talking about the gold standard and how important that was, and so he was really. And I was just like, this seemed kind of arcane to me, but it turned out to be absolutely right that when we went off the gold standard completely in 1971, 1 ounce of gold was $35 an ounce, and today it's what $2,160 or something like that. So the dollar has literally lost 98.6% of its value since 1971. And back then, and what this is, Cedric, is it's 100% taxation. It's in effect 100% taxation over time. So when I grew up, my dad was a professor at Dartmouth, and I remember when he got his job there, and the house he bought was $20,000, and this was about in 1971, and maybe a couple of years before that. And today, that same house is way over $1 million. And his salary as a Dartmouth professor, I think it was about $17,000 back then, and that was like pretty good pay. He was really happy with. And my mom didn't work, so it was one income, one income, stay at home mom, 10 acres of land, overlooking a river, $20,000. So, instead of paying $45,000 for an average car today, you should be paying like $800 for that car. If we had honest money. And so now what's happened is you have this inflation, this money printing press, and it's a regressive tax. So it's a wealth transfer program from the lower income people to the rich people, because the wealthier people, they can afford to buy assets that tend to appreciate against the dollar, like real estate or gold or S&P 500 index or Bitcoin. So, but the somebody on a hourly wage or fixed income, they can't afford to do that. So they just get farther and farther behind. And of course, the official inflation number, the official CPI number that's released each month, is a phony number. Economists basically agree that it's 4 to 6% understates inflation by 4 to 6%. So, then you have also technological progress should be pushing prices down 2 to 3% per year. But we don't see that because you get the money printer that's also eating up that. So groceries should be getting cheaper, right? Farming is a lot more efficient now than it was back, 30, 40 years ago. It's automated farming, it's mass production farming, but groceries keep getting more and more expensive. And that's because of the money printer. And I didn't realize that until I really got into Bitcoin, how important that was. And so Bitcoin is just a tremendous teacher there.
Yeah, I mean, it's teaching us so much.
Yep.
I want to get back to the the advertising career.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe, I mean, I've gotten to hear a little bit about your life through some of your videos. So it seems like you've done fairly well in advertising. So I'd love to hear maybe what you did.
Well, my focus
Or
was really I was doing a lot of political fundraising and advertising, and direct response marketing. And what's great about direct response marketing is it's different than like brand advertising, like the big corporations do. So direct response, you need to get a response. You need to get some kind of, they need to sign up on your landing page, or they need to, send some money in or take some kind of action that you're looking for. And what I love about marketing is it's a great study of human behavior. You become kind of an amateur psychologist, and you learn what it is that people are looking for and want. And Bitcoin actually kind of fits kind of well into that, because Bitcoin is so perfectly constructed, so perfectly engineered to mirror human behavior and human motivation, because it's really incentives that cause Bitcoin to stay together. It's the miners are incentivized to protect the network, because if they don't protect the network, the value of their Bitcoin goes to zero. So they're incentivized. So that's just incredible how Bitcoin is so perfectly designed to align with human motivations and incentives and desires. So in marketing is that, and I think maybe that was something that kind of intrigued me about Bitcoin, because I could see that it was so well constructed. And one of the things that makes Bitcoin, I think is, so different from the altcoins, the other crypto assets out there, is the Bitcoin structure. It's not the blockchain technology. It's not the proof of work. It's not any one thing. It's how it's put together, the structure of it, and it perfectly aligns human incentives. As Michael Saylor says, Bitcoin is like a growing nest of cyber hornets. The bigger it gets, the more difficult it becomes to attack. And so, it's protected by this wall of energy. And a few weeks back, Kathy Wood pointed out to Elon Musk, one of the comments on X, that the compute power of the Bitcoin network is now bigger than the combined compute power of Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and Apple. These miners are out there, protecting the network and processing transactions, and they're incentivized to do that because of the, this is how they earn Bitcoin. So, and it's really just ingenious.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. I would rephrase it. I think of Bitcoin as the secret sauce is the 21 million, and not that number, but the limit.
Yeah.
And then everything else was used to sort of be put together to enforce it.
Yeah, you have to have a limit.
Yeah, like the way the car is, you put together the transmission, the wheel. None of those were all individual inventions brought together by one person. but
Right.
or I mean, invented by one person at once, but brought together by people.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, the
I feel
21
like it's,
million is key.
yeah, and I
I
feel like
mean, it didn't
everything
matter what
else.
that, yeah, just it had to be some kind of a cap.
Yeah, and
Yep.
then the trustless part all benefits that, but you can only get the enforceable limit through these other things that also become,
Right.
incredibly important. There's so much here I want to dig into, especially around advertising. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, uh, I mean, you've gone viral lately, and so I want to talk about it in terms of like advertising, and you think about like mainstream media, and there were like three networks, and now you
Yeah.
have, you mentioned the FANG companies, right? And I think of those as sort of the new mainstream media, like as the
Right.
four channels, right? You got Amazon, you got Apple, you got uh, uh, Disney. These are the channels that control everything, Netflix. And so I'm wondering, and I'm also curious, just and social media is a very different animal, though. But like, what do you think about people, even like us, but even our kids living on social media,
Yeah.
exposing their lives, but even monetizing it, like making careers out of
Right.
exposing their lives? Like, it's kind of a
Mm-hmm.
weird notion.
Yeah,
Um,
it is. Yeah, but it's got ups and it's got pluses and minuses, right? I mean, so you wouldn't really want to go back to the day when you just had three networks, three TV networks, and really no way to get any kind of, get your point of view out there. You're just basically blacked out. I mean, getting my book published in 1981 was a huge achievement because there weren't that many publishers. You had to submit it to New York publishers and get rejected, and it took, years to do. And now you can just, go to Amazon and publish a book. Now, maybe, Amazon, of course, if they don't like the book, maybe they cancel it or whatever, but you still have a lot more ways to get the word, get your point of view. You can even become a little media company. And so there's good and bad to that, but I think basically it's good. Uh I mean, I think it encourages creativity, but I think, social media is also very addictive. Social media is some people say it's more addictive than crack, and so I do think it damages brains if people are just into just looking at their screen all the time and reacting to things. And so, there's pluses and minuses, but I would take this, I think, over just three networks, three TV networks, and that's it. That you get your 20 minutes of news, and there's maybe, it's whatever, and I don't know if you followed another thing that kind of is Bitcoin and just sort of recently just is just recent events, how the CIA and the deep state and the intelligence agencies really control the media. And Google was basically a CIA operation. I mean, yeah, it was a private company, but yeah, CIA, they were the biggest customer, and so basically Google is a extension of the CIA, as is Microsoft, as is Amazon, and big tech and big government. They're partners with big government. So back now, but think of how much easier it was for the CIA and the deep state and the national security state to control the narrative when you only had three TV networks and they only had maybe 20 minutes of news on a night, and only 10 minutes of the news even mattered because the rest of the news was just some kind of fluffy, featurey thing. So people really had no access to information back then.
Yeah, I mean, I see what you're
You know?
saying. But I still, I've noted this before, but like Netflix, I don't know if you know the founder of Netflix, or the co-founder, Mark Bernays. His
Mm-hmm.
dad was Edward Bernays, I think, or his uncle, and his uncle was Freud.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think Freud, the father of psychology. Edward Bernays was sort of the father of propaganda and advertising.
Mm-hmm.
And then his son heads up Netflix or founds Netflix. I mean, it's just so odd. And then,
Interesting.
and I wonder, you're a big Elon fan,
Oh yeah. Yeah,
and
very
because
much so.
and I wonder, I would love to talk about Elon, but also like, what do you think of like, I mean, Zuck and Jobs and Sergey Brin and Larry Page, are these CIA projects? I mean, I feel like they are.
I think so. I
I've
mean,
read into some of the things you were noting
yeah,
before. I mean,
yeah,
was it
I think
Mockingbird
so.
and Operation
Operation
Paperclip?
Mockingbird.
I mean,
Yeah.
all sort of inform our media and our education and a lot of our
Mm-hmm.
institutions. And I still
Yep.
think we have way more outlets now, and I don't know if Elon's a good guy, but like there is still a lot of control if you can influence the key people at Netflix,
Oh
Apple,
yeah.
Google, Microsoft.
Well, I like Elon for lots of reasons. You know, he was a Democrat pretty much until recently, and he sort of, I guess, has kind of moved over. Right? He says he's a centrist. It's just that the political spectrum has just, moved
Sure.
over here, and he stood here. But I've always admired him because, I mean, I just thought anybody who can start his own space program, and be docking, manned missions to the space station, and he's doing this as a private individual, and he came over here from South Africa as a college student, or even before college, and went to college, I guess, for a couple of years in Canada, then made his way to the U.S., and he built all this, from nothing. He started, Zip2, which was one of the original sort of mapping companies, kind of a yellow pages with a map to it, and sold that for a lot, and then co-founded the biggest shareholder of PayPal.
Yeah, it was
And
X that he founded, I think,
X,
that
yeah, it was, and he
merged
was
with
actually
PayPal.
upset because he wanted to be called X, but he got sort of
Yes.
outvoted or something. And but I just think he's amazing, and then he, launches the SpaceX, and he's got these rockets and reusable rockets that, you know, I mean, so he's really kind of a true real life, you know, Hank Reardon, Atlas Shrugged. He really is just sort of almost a Superman, I think. And but I like I I don't know where we would be without X. I mean, that is a relative. People do complain that it's not a completely free speech platform. Nothing could be completely free speech, but I do think it's viewpoint neutral, and it allows all sides, I think, to get their point of view out, whereas you cannot say anything remotely controversial on Facebook, especially if you're kind of a right of center
I
person.
my counter would be it's hard for me to imagine that any of these guys are truly free and unbeholden men to the state. I just don't know, especially with the amount of money they get and
Yeah,
how endorsed they be. And I've heard stories, and I don't know what's true or not, but whether Elon has just bought a lot of tech and bought a lot of rights to companies and sort of been the salesman. I don't know, because there are some
yeah,
topics that he appears to be dumb on. I mean, the guy who created X and then merged it with PayPal wants Dogecoin to be the world
yeah.
currency.
Can
Like,
you believe it? That's so
and it
disappointing.
feels that felt so like, even if you don't know what you're talking about, boy, are you just putting people in the wrong direction and you're
Yeah,
harming people.
yeah,
And then my dark side with this whole thing is, Neuralink, the blue check mark, getting us all to identify ourselves on Twitter, and then turning this into X/WhatsApp, so that you want to go to the dentist, you make the appointment on Twitter, you pay on
yeah.
Twitter, and you use Xbox or whatever. And then I see him
Right.
dressing up as Satan for Halloween. It's
Oh, he
like,
did. I
yeah,
didn't see
one,
that.
you could look. I mean, it's an elaborate satanic costume. I mean, not like
That's
a
not
red
good. Okay.
tights and. So I
I mean,
have
I am a
no
fan, but
idea.
obviously he's
He's
not
a
perfect by any
character. I
means. He's a
mean,
character, and I think this Doge thing. I mean, he clearly doesn't really understand Bitcoin or what it makes. He hasn't
I
studied it, I
can't
don't think.
believe that with the guy who was involved in PayPal. Like, how can he not know currency better?
I think
That was the part I was like,
here's my theory, Cedric, on the whole. I think he wants to control it. Whatever he's involved in, he wants to control it.
I
You cannot control Bitcoin. He can control Dogecoin, right?
sure he could pump it,
Yeah,
can't
and
control it even.
yeah, he could. So I mean,
I
you could
don't
turn it into
know.
some kind of
Like,
frequent flyer type of token or something, and use it like in some sort of
I think
internal.
I think the
Yeah, you
free
could do that.
switch. I think the free speech on X is part of the mousetrap right now.
Oh, you
Like, we
could be
all,
right.
and I think. And when I say I think these, strong opinions held loosely, like, I mean, these,
Yeah.
shots in the dark here, but like, I feel like they're trying to set up Tucker, and kind of be the new ABC, NBC, whatever, where it's
Hmm.
a limited hangout, but these are the biggest speakers in the space. The way, like, I think Rogan got captured by Spotify. There's no way $100 million does not affect how you run your show. All those apology videos
Yeah.
he had to make, everything happened, the way they humiliated him. I mean,
Oh, they did.
I feel like
Yeah.
they did with that. And
Yeah.
like, I just think you're captured. And like, if you're offered 100 million versus like making 20 million independently,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
you're bought.
I would
I'd
definitely
rather
rather
make
make 20
20 million
million. Oh,
independently,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah,
And
I
not be
would. I
bought and
definitely.
paid for.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I don't know. I
Well,
think the
Elon,
long game with Elon is makes me nervous, whether he's aware of it or not. But I just don't think it's
yeah.
all gravy for
Well, when you
us.
become that big, so you've got these car factories all over the world, and your biggest factories in China, right? So it's hard not to be compromised because you basically are beholden to these
We see that with the
politicians.
NBA.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I don't, he can't really criticize China unless he wants them to just shut down his plant or take it over, right? He'd have to,
So
and
then,
that
what do
is
you
yeah. So
and what do you
yeah.
think of this TikTok thing? I mean, what do you think of TikTok in general as a media person, advertising executive? It seems
Yeah,
to
I mean,
me like
I'm
it's
very much
crack.
against. I don't like it because it's like sort of it's social media on steroids. It's just
Yeah.
like it's like super intense, and in China they don't let the kids. The version that is here is much more intense than the version that is
Well, I heard it's more.
than over there.
I don't know what we get fed, but like on Twitter, what I think is somebody from my government told me that in China, it's all about like improving the kids' test scores, and they're exposed to just pure math, science, and really smart things. And our kids are just
Yeah,
basically it's like porn and debauchery. And I couldn't imagine being like a 12-year-old boy with an iPhone and
I
TikTok.
think the
Like
kids are only allowed like 40 minutes a day on the social media in China.
well, I'm saying they limit it there, but here
Yeah, they limit it.
the kid would be on it all day,
Yeah,
and it's supposedly a different algorithm that's just going
it
to
is.
destroy minds,
I think it's
and
designed to do
turn
that.
them into yeah, I think exactly what it is, and so it's a weird place because I'm not like for the government banning free speech or banning platforms or but I do think that it's some sort of attack on us
I
or
thought it was
whether it's internal
interesting.
or
It is an
external,
attack.
domestic or foreign. I think it's an attack.
Yeah,
I think they're all an attack on us personally,
they
but I
are.
think
They
Twitter's the
are.
only one where you could kind of like fight back or try to
Yeah.
find your team maybe or something. Um,
Yeah, I think TikTok is the most intense in terms of just rewiring the brain and getting you addicted. I think it's more intense than anything else,
yeah, I
I
try never to
think.
go. I've been there like maybe 12
Yeah, I
times for like
hated
a
it.
minute or
I just
less.
felt like after a few minutes on there, I just feel like my brain is scrambled. It's just bizarre.
Terrible place.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to talk about like Bitcoin and advertising.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I was at a conference recently, Bitcoin Day Naples, and the topic was, or not, the discussion was around whether Bitcoin needs Wall Street to get better advertising. And I got me a little upset because I feel like there's no advertising executive better in the world than Satoshi Nakamoto
Right.
because
Yeah.
here we were in a whole room, no one could shut the fuck up talking about Bitcoin.
Right.
Like
Oh, I
that's
know.
pretty great advertising. And
It's
yeah,
amazing.
I know that there's billions of people we need to reach, but I don't think that's because Satoshi lacked anything, or you want to call it Bitcoiners or plebs are not doing a good job. And but but what do you think? I mean, are the Bitcoin ETF, is Wall Street going to roll out these snazzy commercials that are going to speak to people that we haven't been able to reach? Is it because they're better at it, or is it just because now
Well,
that's the way the game is played, and we couldn't have done this before that moment?
yeah, I mean, that's obviously pluses and minuses to the ETFs. I think that the ETFs, I think, will accelerate the adoption. Now, some people just, I think probably most people just buy Bitcoin and keep it in the ETF, and that will protect them from the fiat money government's fiat money printer to some degree. It won't allow them to won't doesn't allow people to self custody and be a sovereign individual. It doesn't do that, but you are getting the benefit of the protection from the fiat money printer. I guess I think the ETFs are good. People can buy them or not buy them. It's uh, you hear that like BlackRock is going to control everything, but remember they're just really taking orders from their customers, right? The customers are just buying the ETF, and they have to buy a corresponding amount of Bitcoin, and then if the customer sells the ETF, they have to sell a corresponding amount of Bitcoin. So BlackRock's not really controlling the Bitcoin. It's just an order taker. So I think that's a little bit overblown. But anytime something gets Wall Streetized, it gets, you're going to have a lot more sort of margin and perhaps, leverage and hedge fund activity, and there's going to be price manipulation. Though there was a lot of price manipulation in the sort of Sam Bankman-Fried era, the 2002, that was pretty horrendous. And so maybe having the SEC, Wall Street, kind of regularizing some of this stuff is good. I think it's a net plus because it's getting a lot more people invested in Bitcoin, and I think what we ultimately want is Bitcoin to be adopted. And the way that Bitcoin gets adopted is if the price goes up. So we want that because that will accelerate adoption. And then if somebody, I think if somebody buys the ETF just to get a taste of Bitcoin, it will get them interested in learning more about it, and some portion of those people will become self-custody, will move off the ETF. They'll see the value of actually owning their Bitcoin. But a lot of people will stick with the ETF. But I think the ETF will be an introduction for many people. So I think it's a net plus.
Well, I got so many mixed feelings on it. I definitely think it's a net plus in the short term. I mean, this thing is hoovering up Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I do think it is exposing people in a way that makes it more accessible to gain the price exposure to Bitcoin and get out of the threat of the fiat money printer. I can't help but I'm always sort of I look at things cynically, permanently, but I try to fight to be a long-term optimist.
Yeah.
So so it's like 99% cynicism. But the 1% is going to be like the whole way I feel at the end of the conversation always. But
well, what do you think is the downside? What do you think?
Yeah, the downsides. I think there's three, and I think that the downsides are that, let's say BlackRock, the co-option of Bitcoin, whether it's BlackRock or the ETF vehicles through the government, is that this is a never get out vehicle, right? So you put your Bitcoin in, Bitcoin gets hubbed in, it's never allowed out. Let's just call it that way. Like you can't extract Bitcoin from it. It just kind of locks Bitcoin in. And as long as people keep buying Bitcoin through the ETF, it just never leaves. Yeah. So now it's a honeypot, right? And that now you're not in self-custody, and I don't think that's a great thing. So what comes from that is now two more things. One, whether they make self-custody quote unquote illegal. They can't enforce that in any way that makes sense, but they can kind of say it is illegal. If we find out you're doing it, you're going to jail, and most people don't want to live their life in a box, right?
Right. And
so
most people don't want
I
that
think
threat.
Right.
Yeah.
So now I think it's a vehicle to sort of like make self-custody illegal, to kind of like you shouldn't hold it. You should have exposure to it. You need us to hold it, right? That's sort of that long march of the institution. And you should do nothing for yourself, right?
Right.
And I don't think that's great. And then I think that the third one is like, this is the honeypot that we've always talked about, i.e. Satoshi's coins. Like, hey, you want to break SHA-2256, bro? Grab Satoshi's coins. They're yours, right? I'll put the coins out there. You get them. And now there is actually going to be 1 million coins that you could break the code. You can get them. Somebody can get them. An entity large enough, whether it's the U.S. government or China, or someone's going to come down with the hammer one day and say, I want them. Whether it's Bitcoin's now 10 million a coin and we're fighting World War IV and the government says, we can't win this war without your Bitcoin.
Yeah,
at X price, at
$82
an ounce, right? That's what I'm saying. $35 an ounce. I'm going to use the same term. We want your Bitcoin at $73,000 an ounce, and it's ours, and you cannot take it any further. And then as soon as we get it, it's worth back to 100 million a coin or whatever.
Yeah.
And we're going to use that to fight a war. And that doesn't do anything to Bitcoin, the protocol.
Right.
Like you can still be the person who ran to Africa or hid in New York City in a basement.
But most people aren't going to do that.
Most people aren't going to do it voluntarily, but you can still do it, and the protocol will survive, and the TikTok next block. But it's just in terms of a honeypot. Like, how is some human at some point not going to have enough power to be like, I want you to turn those keys for me?
Yeah, I mean, it is. Bitcoin. One of the you kind of always do need rails, off and on to the fiat money system from Bitcoin, and right. So it's it's going to be tough to get away completely from government. It's not going to be easy.
The key is to get government to work for us.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah.
key. It's hard to get, like, because we're in a world where they're not working for us. And
No,
most
not
people
at
are
all.
happy with that. Like they're just like happy with the way things are going directionally
Yeah.
or like vibe wise, I would say vibe wise. Doesn't mean
They seem to be less happy lately with
less
the
happy.
inflation. Yeah, less happy. Yeah, but they are kind of like, you know, uh,
And
frogs
that's
in
something,
the,
Ben, I want to ask you about. Like, I
yeah,
mean, this inflation thing. I mean, I ask this every show, but like, we got the people on one hand who are like, it's doom and gloom. Like, the dollar's
yeah.
breaking, hyper Bitcoinization's happening. We're going to 1 million this year. And I'm not even trying to get into price predictions. And then we got the other people who are like, hey, the economy is not too bad. It might
Hmm.
break in a few years, but like,
Yeah,
we're doing pretty good and unemployment's low and the market's booming and everywhere I go, and I just drove from Georgia back to Southwest Florida, so 500 miles,
yeah,
and most of it was packed with
yeah,
people at every retail shopping center, gas station, whatever. I mean, there's a lot of towns that
yeah,
aren't doing great, and I get it, but the places you'd expect to be busy are busy.
yeah. No, yeah, I don't think you can really say that the economy is awful, right? It's you got this inflation. I mean, I lived through Carter inflation. You know, when this is when
Mm,
okay, went off the gold standard in 1971, and so then what they did was they printed a lot of money, they juiced the economy. Nixon won 49 states because the economy is going really well, and Vietnam War is ending and stuff. But then, you know, the hangover was the inflation, the 12% inflation rate that came in under Carter. And of course, we all blame Carter because, you know, we're Republicans blaming Carter, but it really, you know, was the inflation, was the money printer that was the problem, and I didn't fully
mm.
understand that at that point. And then, of course, Volcker came in and he had to really ratchet down the money printer, and he did it pretty hard, and he created a recession, you know, that lasted until 1982. Then there was boom times again because they, you know, what Reagan did is tax cuts, but they also let up on the money printer again, which, you know, I didn't fully understand. I thought it was, you know, the Reagan tax cuts that did it, and I'm sure that had something to do with it, but it was also just the uh, turning on the money printer. So, um, you know, and so this money printer does create this sort of boom and bust effect, and we saw that with the 2008 financial crisis, and you know that came right out of the blue, so you never know when these sort of economic collapses are going to happen. They happen suddenly, like, you know, Solomon Brothers goes, you know, bankrupt, and Lehman Brothers, and this and
Mm.
that, and just one bank, and the whole economy kind of goes down like a you know, house of cards. And I, you know, I don't think we're going to be like the Weimar Republic. We're probably not going to make that mistake, but I think they're going to have to keep on ratcheting up the money printer because you've got this 34, $35 trillion national debt. They've got to finance that. They got to pay the interest on that. And the debt just gets bigger. I think in 2019, end of 2019, just before the pandemic, I think the national debt was around 18 trillion. Now it's 34, 35 trillion. Pretty soon it's going to be 100 trillion. And they'll monetize the debt. They'll pay the interest on it. They'll never pay the debt, but you can only keep that up so long. I don't know how long you can keep it up, but you can probably keep that up for quite a while. I think you can keep it up, you know, but it does seem like it's an accelerating problem. It's kind of my point. It's not, it's kind of a, you know, it's like an exp. So, yeah, the national debt doubled like in just a few years. And so the doubling is happening faster. Um, so I think
I think
that,
everything's happening faster in every
yeah,
vector. This I learned this with Texas Slim when we just
yeah,
looked at the food because you know the food was obviously getting bad when we were growing up.
mm-hmm,
You know they came out with the food pyramid. They told me pizza was the best meal for me. It's got bread, it's got
yeah,
vegetables, it's got meat. You know, it's got everything on it, dairy. But but like in the 10 years from 1980 to 1990, you know, it went from like bad being like 1.0 to 1.1, and from
mm-hmm,
like 2010 to 2020 it went from like 1.4 to like 9.9.
right.
Like things are
Yeah,
just getting S curve right up or J curve, and so I don't mean to cut you off there, but I am curious about your rabbit hole story. Like like
the
how'd you
Bitcoin. Well, like what was I most attracted to about
or when
Bitcoin?
did you find out about Bitcoin? Were
Oh,
you
well,
you know
actually,
like
yeah, that's kind of interesting
and
too.
what drew
Yeah,
you? What made you interested? Was it in a speculative thing? Was it
my
about the
son taught
advertising? Was it
my
the
son told me about it. Like back in I'm thinking it was like maybe 2016, 2015. He was maybe 19 or so, and he was interested in Bitcoin, and he had bought I think a coin, or maybe had a coin or two, and I think he bought
How
it
old
for
was
like a
he?
he was like 19, but he was the coins were cheap then. I think he bought it like for $100 or something like that, and so he was really interested, and he sold it though because I think at 20, 10x or 20x, so he sold it, and but that's why I got it. My thought was that there's no way this is going to work, and but it was interesting, and he was reading. My ex-wife was he'd say, yeah, Peter's really into this Bitcoin. He's reading these obscure economic texts and blogs. He's reading you know Menger, and so he really got into the whole economics of it, and so I was intrigued by it, and I thought that I didn't think it would work, but then it went up to 20,000 in 2017, and then crashed like 85%. And then I thought, if this thing comes back from this crash, I'm going to start looking at it a little more carefully, because that would mean it would be a real thing. It's not just going to be like a tulip mania,
Mm.
which was something that I kind of thought it might be. I thought it was good. I thought it was better than the tulip mania, because it already had lasted quite a few years, and my son was really into it, and a couple of his friends were really into it. And but then I bought my first Bitcoin in 2019. Um, that's when I
Well,
really got into it. Yeah.
so what was the journey like from 2016 to 2019? Did you listen to podcasts? Did you read articles? Were you like, oh, this is a speculative thing? Oh, this could be a currency. Oh, like I always like,
Yeah.
for me, like, looking at something like, it's the elephant thing. Like you grab the tail first and you're like, oh, like this is something I could bet on and maybe this will make me some money. I always wonder like, when I was 21 years old, like, yeah, maybe I did buy like AOL stock, and I thought I'd take $500 and turn it into like 5 grand. I was hoping, but
Yeah.
like my point wasn't to become like an AOL advocate for life.
Right.
I didn't necessarily like read the 10K. I didn't read book. I was into economics. I was studying economics, but I
Yeah.
didn't read a book because of that investment. I could have found a great checking account and didn't need me
Right.
to read an additional book on the history of checking, right? I was reading books on macroeconomics and stuff because that was my for coursework. I wasn't reading it in my spare time. There was nothing in my
Yeah.
life that would turn me on. And I was always seeking knowledge and learning, but like it wasn't like someone was like, "Hey, I think Starbucks is making great coffee and they're building lots of franchises."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Well, I'm gonna go read about how to make franchises, go viral in America." Like I'd be like,
Yeah.
"Okay, here's $1,000. Let's go see what happens." But
Right. Well, I was listening to a lot of podcasts on YouTube, and I think I stumbled across some documentaries on Bitcoin, and of course my son was talking about it, and I read some books on it, um, like Block Size War and some of the earlier
mm,
books. So I really like the philosophy of it. I like the philosophy, and but then the question was, is it going to work?
mm,
And will it, can it be taken out by government? I kind of thought that Bitcoin could be taken out by government if it ever got to be a certain level. Like maybe the technology, maybe all this makes sense, maybe it all fits together, maybe it all holds together. But if the government decides to take it out, it could probably do it. That was basically my thought, and it probably still could, but I think it's getting harder because so many people hold Bitcoin. I don't know how many Americans hold. I've heard number like 40 million might hold some Bitcoin. Does that sound right to you?
yeah, yeah.
40
I
million,
mean,
maybe.
who
So it's
cares?
got
Give
a
or take
big,
10 million sounds good.
yeah, it's got a big constituency. It becomes
Right.
something that it becomes difficult for a politician to go after Bitcoin. And even Elizabeth Warren, of course, has very been attacking crypto and so forth. But even recently, she's kind of changed her tune a little bit about
Mm.
Bitcoin, suggesting that maybe it's a little different than these other cryptos. And it just seems like even she has changed her tune a little bit about Bitcoin, that maybe the problem is more the exchanges and the scam coins and the SBFs of the world, that maybe is the problem. So she clearly doesn't understand what Bitcoin is. Maybe somebody on her staff owns Bitcoin. Maybe somebody maybe somebody on her staff, explained it to her or something. But it does seem like she maybe has changed her tune a little bit on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, like you said, you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you,
Yeah,
and you get
yeah,
that blowback, and it's kind of gets hard to rationally argue with some of it. And thinking along about those lines, one of your books was Win Life, right? What was the
Yeah.
subtitle to that book?
The subtitle is success skills schools don't teach. And when you go through school, and I had a bunch of podcasts on my YouTube channel called Advice to Teens. And so this book is really almost like it's kind of a distillation of of the Advice to Teens series that I did for my kids, and I just kind of put it into a book because really the schools aren't teaching anything of value. They're it's like woke ideology indoctrination, but they're not teaching them, how to balance a checkbook, anything about finance, anything about entrepreneurship, how to make a living, anything about economics, how to how to make statistical judgments about something, how to use statistics, how to judge probabilities and whether something's a good bet or a bad bet, these kinds of things. So they're not, how to solve life's problems, how to solve basic problems, more complex problems. So basically this book that I put together is for aimed at young adults, teenagers and young adults, and to give them the skills that the schools aren't teaching them, because the schools really aren't teaching anything of value. I think maybe you've heard me say it on other podcasts, but I basically think parents should not send their kids to school at all, school or college. You should homeschool your kids. You can pretty much learn anything you need to know online. You can learn the skills you need, and the skills that you can't learn online, you can learn them at community college. um, and you'll be employable. I mean, and Elon Musk has said this a lot, that really there's no need to be going through all this, 12 years of school and 4 years of college and then coming out at the other end with no skills. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
as a parent of young kids, I'm struggling with that now.
yeah,
So, I mean, my parents were lifelong New York City public school teachers. I grew up thinking public schools were an important institution. I've really changed course on that.
yeah.
But
Well, my dad went to Stuyvesant, which is a famous public school,
very
and
famous school. My
yeah,
my dad went to Brooklyn Tech, so there's
yeah,
three. It's like Stuyvesant, Brooklyn
and it was a
Tech, and
great
Bronx
school.
Science. Those are great
Yeah.
schools, or were, and I don't know what they are today. I think they're still great schools, or very
Hmm.
recently. My son just got into a great school, the way Stuyvesant is a great school, and he's going to go there in
Hmm.
the fall. And I struggle with it because it's a great school. It's one of the best in the country.
Yeah.
I do like the notion of homeschooling in the sense for several reasons. One, it's like my kid's going to learn math. Why not? Instead of the best school, the teacher in town, how about the best teacher in the country?
Right. I
Online
like
kind of
that.
thing. And so, but my son is going to one of the better schools in the country, so I'm kind
Hmm.
of there without having to do
That's
it
good.
myself. I still work my fiat job. This
Hmm.
pod is a passion project of mine. It
Oh, that's
doesn't pay the
great.
bills. And in fact, like the little money I make is just a justification for the time it takes away from my wife and family, because
Hmm.
we'd all rather be together in some regards and have the time,
Yeah.
but so I don't have the time to necessarily teach him myself, or
Hmm.
or you necessarily. And I think I want to get there, but like I struggle with that. Like,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of parents are growing up. This, think about this, like as a cultural thing, homeschooling was like a made fun of,
Hmm.
especially
Right.
in New York City suburban or New York State suburban. It was not something that was like looked upon as like the epitome of success, or what you should be doing. And I think
Right.
all that's been turned on its head. That's not where I stand, but
Boy,
it's
when you meet homeschool kids, though, they're just so light years ahead of most public school kids. They're just the homeschool kids. They're like young adults. They're just
right.
totally with it. They've got their act together, and they're very social. They're very, you know, um, they're just
Well, the
like
big
young
thing
adults.
I think they don't teach
Yeah.
at school is critical thinking,
No, they don't.
kind of like what you
No.
were getting at.
Yeah.
And maybe what
Yeah.
other advice would you give to young people to win life? And
To
what
win
would you
life.
define? Well, how would you
Well,
define what is a
well,
life that is winning? What is winning in
well, I think
life?
you kind of want to win life is kind of uh the reason I picked that is that the covers at chess Magnus Carlsen, chess player. So I think that life, you kind of treat it like as a game that you try to be successful at, that you try to win, and you can win at different levels. You don't have to win at, Elon Musk level, but there's lots of ways that you can, there's lots of areas of life. It's not just about making money or building a business, but there's health goals that you would have, all kinds of goals that you might have. You might have 6 goals. You might have spiritual goals, family goals, but you have to have a routine and a system for dealing with, for achieving all these goals. And I always say, it's not my original formulation. I got this from Scott Adams. It's systems over goals. In other words, you don't say, I want to be a billionaire, I want to be a millionaire. You don't think that way. You think, I want to provide a useful service, or I want to build something that will be of use to people. I want to be, and you kind of just have a system for doing that, and then these other, the financial goals can kind of take care of themselves, or the fitness goals. So a good example is my daughter Maddie, who I had that little, blow up with. But she came to me one day when she was in high school, and she said, or maybe it was, yeah, late high school. She said she wanted to get in better shape, and but the problem was she didn't like to exercise. She hated to exercise. And I said, well, here's what you do. The main thing is to start each day and don't have any kind of goal in mind. So put your gym outfit on, put your sneakers on, and head down to the gym. And if when you get there, you turn around and come home, that's fine. You started. And do the same thing every day. And you might only make it to the parking lot and turn around and come home 3 days in a row. But then one day you might decide to go into the gym. You might decide to get on the treadmill for 10 minutes or whatever, and then get off and go home. And then you might do that for a few days, and then maybe a few week later you might decide to stay on the treadmill for 30 minutes or try some other equipment. Maybe you'll find a dance class, a dance fitness class that looks appealing, and you'll meet people, and this will become part of your lifestyle and part of your daily routine. It's just something that you do every day, and you've got friends there. And she looked at me and she said, I love that, Dad. And then 6 months later, she had like washboard ab stomach, and if you're thinking about the pain of the exercise and I've got to get on the treadmill for 45 minutes, it's probably not going to happen. You just got to start each day. And that getting back to the breakdancing, that's how I do that, because that's actually kind of a painful kind of way to exercise, because there's a lot of it's painful. But if I just start with some little bit of top rock, and then after a little bit of that, you get down the floor and you move around a little bit, and then eventually you start loosening up, and you start moving better. And I think that's a good analogy for every part of life. You don't think about, I want to build a Fortune 500 company. No, maybe you want to work for yourself, and it's still a job, because instead of working for one employer, maybe you have a couple of clients or 3 clients, and that adds up to a full-time job. Then maybe you get another client or another customer, and then pretty soon you have to hire somebody, and you just kind of build that way. And at some point maybe it becomes Tesla, or maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's just the neighborhood grocery store or something. But the point is that you have to start and just kind of work your system and figure out what's working. Like for me, the breakdancing was a great way to get in shape. I was losing weight. I lost 15 pounds pretty quickly. Whenever you find something that's working, just keep doing it. Just keep doing the same thing. And that would be kind of, it's routine, it's daily, it's a kind of a lifestyle. And don't think about the big goal that you might have, because for one thing, your goals are probably going to change as you go, right? The life is a journey. At least that's how I see it. I did not think I was going to be in the advertising business. The opportunity presented itself, and I said, okay, yeah, this looks pretty good. I seem to be doing well at this. I actually wrote speeches for President Reagan for his 1984 campaign, and then for President George H.W. Bush for his 1988 campaign. So I was a speechwriter, and so I started a speech writing business that sort of morphed into an advertising agency, because I was able to make more money instead of writing speeches, which is kind of, you have to write an original speech for each customer, for each client. But with an ad, if an ad is working, it's like a royalty. You get a 20% markup or a 17% markup, and so you're just selling many copies. It's just going out there, and you're charging by the copy. And that was a good way to make money. Royalties are really a good way to go. So make something once and sell many copies. It could be cookies, it could be ads, it could be books, it could be, whatever.
Yeah, no, it's a
So
nice way to scale.
yeah.
Speaking along those lines, I mean, you've written several books, so I
Hmm.
would love to write a book. I have an idea in my head, but it's not like I've never done anything. I got my full-time job in the fiat mines. I do the pod,
Hmm.
my passion
Mm.
project. I work for the Bitcoin Advisor, helping people get their sats off
Mm.
exchanges, securing it for the rest of their lives, and passing on to
Great.
generations. But like the book thing, oh man, like so a couple questions. How do you do this? Do you set goals like you were saying, but like and
Yeah.
why did you write the book about Bitcoin? And one of the reasons I ask about that is, you think about writing a book, you say, "Oh, I got this idea. Here's my book. I want to write this." And like even if the idea is original,
Hmm.
but like you're like to express some of the idea, I have to talk about what is Bitcoin, and like that part's
Right.
not original. Like
No, that's
someone
not
else has
original.
written this
Someone's
somewhere. I
written
got this
that.
idea somewhere. Like, how do I write this? Why am I writing this? How long do I spend on this part? And then how do I get to that part? And why am I sitting and how do you just start? And but why'd you write the book about
Well,
Bitcoin?
well, let me just, before I hit the Bitcoin book, I'll just tell you how I wrote Poison Ivy, because that was my first book. So that was the toughest one, because writing a book just seemed like my father was an English professor, so he was a writer. He'd written books, and so I kind of grew up in that kind of environment. And writing a book was considered by my dad and the people he hung around like a big achievement. So that was something I wanted to do, and I had this idea for the book. And basically my idea was I would sit there and write 3 pages a day. That was my goal. Had to write 3 pages a day. If I didn't write 3 pages, if I didn't write anything and just had writer's block, I'd have to sit there in front of the typewriter. We didn't have computers then. Had to sit there in front of the typewriter for 8 hours until I got the 3 pages out. And so that was my routine, and it worked pretty well, because pretty soon, if you write 3 pages a day in 100 days, you have 300 pages. And maybe I had 600 pages, and bring it back down to 300, because half of it is not good. So that was the key, was writing 3 pages a day. So you just chunk it. It's kind of that system over goals. You just write 3 pages a day, and then once the 3 pages are be kind of like little essays or little parts, then you kind of fit them together. So maybe something that you wrote later, maybe that belongs more at the beginning, and you kind of take the scissors out and the scotch tape and you paste it together in different order, and you kind of rewrite it and so forth. But it was a system. It was 3 pages a day, and that worked pretty well. And I kind of write all my books that way. The chapters tend to be sort of short, and that's kind of how it is. But now with Bitcoin, like a book like Bitcoin, because it's technical, I'm an English major. I'm not a techie person, so I had to learn a lot about the tech just so I could conceptually understand it. And I really wanted to understand Bitcoin, and the best way to understand something is to have to teach it. Because you can study it you can put all this study into it, but then if you get up there and you start teaching it, and then somebody asks a question and you don't really know the answer, you find out what you don't know when you're teaching it. And so the same with writing a book. So since I had done all this study on Bitcoin, and since I'm a writer, it made a certain amount of sense for me to write a book, because I thought maybe I could explain it in a way that it hadn't been explained before, that in a more simple way. It's a beginner's guide. So I tried to make it like sixth grade level, really, write it so explain it so a sixth grader could understand it. And that basically is a rule in advertising too. You don't want to write ads that are, you want your advertisements need to be at a fourth and sixth grade level. So otherwise they're not going to work. And the same with so Bitcoin, I tried to make it really almost sixth or eighth grade level, that it's for non-techies. But I had to understand the tech well enough that there weren't gaps in there. And I'm sure I made some errors in there. I'm sure that and some people have pointed out some errors that I corrected, but because there is just a lot in there, a lot to it. And you don't want to get so in the weeds that people can't understand it. So you've got to kind of know what to hit on and what to leave out. So, but I think that's my contribution on the Bitcoin book, is that I think it explains it pretty well to complete newbies.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that's great, and
Yeah.
we definitely need more of those. So I would love to get a copy. I haven't
Yeah, I'll
been
send
through
it
it
to you.
yet. That'd be
Yeah.
awesome, and
Yeah.
a couple of your other books.
Yeah,
I
I'll
mean, I'm
send it.
really interested.
Absolutely.
So I want to know, because your account, Ben and Wanda Hart,
Yeah.
how does your wife like Bitcoin? or does she? I mean, does
Oh,
she
this kind of
care?
interesting. Okay, I'll give you a little story about her. Okay, she escaped from communism in 1978. Okay, so she's Laotian, which is right next to Vietnam. And the communists took over Laos in 1975, and she was about 13 at that point. No, I'm sorry. She would have been younger than that. But by the time the mother made the decision to get out of Laos, she was about 13, and so that would have been about 1978, I guess, 78. And so her mom and actually her older sister, they plotted the escape to get out from to get across the Mekong River and into Thailand. And there's a refugee camp over there. And Wanda's mom sewed gold into the fibers of Wanda's clothing. And in case they got separated, you might be able to buy your way across the border or buy your way out of trouble. And they did get separated. After they got across the Mekong River, they got separated. And so Wanda had to we'll walk through the jungle for 5 days and 5 nights, and knew generally where the refugee camp was, and ended up there, and then stayed in the refugee camp for 18 months. Her other family members also got there. They took different routes. It's kind of an elaborate, plan that her mom and oldest sister came up with. And they stayed there for 18 months, and then she ended up in the United States, arrived in San Francisco with 2 dresses and 1 pair of sandals in November of, I think, 1979. And she was plopped in the public schools, not knowing any language, not knowing any English. And there's no such thing as a Laotian to English dictionary. She was in Maryland by this point. There's no such thing as a Laotian to English dictionary. So she used a Thai dictionary, Thai to English dictionary. And she managed to get through school, she said, with a B average. And then she took some classes at a community college, some desktop publishing class and a data entry typing class, and she got hired by Geico, and she laid out their newsletter and did sort of data entry type work. And then she took another class at the community college on how to be a legal secretary, and so she got moved into the legal division, and she was employee of the month 5 times at Geico for the whole corporation because she never missed work. And she also was on the side where she was doing real estate, because she worked to make extra money. She worked as a kind of a assistant to a realtor, and so she kind of learned how to do real estate. And so she bought some, a little rental property, and then bought another one, and so was doing did quite well. So this is kind of a lesson to. She kind of laughs when she hears about the victims, here in the U.S., people complaining about how tough it is in the U.S. But here she came here with nothing, escaped communism, spent, really kind of just an amazing story, just how she even got here, and was able to make it.
And so, what does she think of Bitcoin? Like after a
And
story
so,
like
well,
that,
she
I
was
mean,
very skeptical of it. She said,
because you
"What?
get,
Yeah,
yeah.
she was not. She
But
was
a lot
not.
of people with that kind of story get
Yeah,
the wealth transfer physical aspect of it, like being able to put money in your mind or your pocket or that kind of
yeah. I think
thing.
she would understand it. She understands it better now. Of course, back then they didn't have any computers or internet or anything like that,
No, you
so
couldn't do it back then,
you couldn't
right?
do it back then. But
But now you
yeah,
can.
well, I think she likes it now that the price has gone. I think she was
Sure.
like, she probably wasn't sold on it too much when it was at
Now I know what you were
15,000.
thinking, Ben.
Yeah, what are you like? What? But yeah, no, I think she does like it, and she understands it, that the digital gold and how it would be very useful to, not carry gold. You pretty hard to carry a gold bar across the border or through an airport, or any kind of significant amount of gold, and you can carry your wealth in your pocket with Bitcoin, or in your head if you can remember a 12-word phrase. So yeah, Bitcoin, I think, has many of the great aspects of has many of the great attributes of gold, but a lot of other attributes that make it vastly superior to gold. So, and I think she understands that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Earlier, I left my chair for a second
there
to
it is.
grab,
Yes,
yep,
Howard's Inn, right?
People's
Howard's Inn. Yeah,
History of the United States by Howard Zinn. I grabbed this after watching Good Will Hunting.
it's been a long time since I read that book, probably 20 something years.
And it's interesting. I mean, the book talks about how, it's a refutation of, certain, perspective on heroes and ideals that
Mm-hmm.
and that appealed to me as someone who felt that what I was learning at public schools wasn't necessarily accurate, or
Well,
the only way to.
I wrote a book called when did Zinn's book come out?
Okay,
When was
well,
it published?
let's see. Oof. Maybe 1959, based on, no, that's a different book.
I think it was
1980, I think I see here. Copyright is the first
1980.
one.
Yeah. So this book was partly an answer
Response.
to the Howard Zinn and others, the history lesson that they were teaching, called Faith and Freedom: The Christian Roots of American Liberty. And this book makes the case that really all of our political freedoms come out of and even our governing structures come out of Puritan theology. So it's so it kind of refutes the liberal history lesson that we're, yeah, they're Enlightenment aspects, but really the Protestant work ethic and just the American work ethic and spirit of capitalism comes out of the Protestant tradition, particularly the out of New England, out of the Puritan tradition there. And that
Do
was
you
where that became a a commercial hub, and people, yeah. So it was just, yeah. Go ahead.
do you think of Bitcoin as an extension of the American
Oh, absolutely.
idea?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what makes Bitcoin one of the aspects of Bitcoin is decentralization. It's decentralized power, right? There's nobody runs or controls Bitcoin. Bitcoin isn't owned or controlled by anyone or any small group. It's a distributed ledger over, million mining computers and validating nodes around the world. And Bitcoin is pretty unchangeable. And it's decentralized. So the brilliance of America was that it was decentralized government. The Now that America became more centralized when you have wars, like the Civil War became a little bit more centralized, World War I a little bit more centralized, World War II gets massively centralized. So we lost a lot of that. But of course, in the 19th century, um, people I don't think really had a sense that they were an American. They were loyal to their local community. Um, they didn't think of themselves as an American the way we did coming out of World War II. There was definitely coming out of World War II. We were, Americans, but that wasn't so back in the 19th century. People were loyal to their local community. And actually, speaking of this whole, like, gold standard, and we didn't even have a central bank. We did have a central bank coming out of the American Revolution. Hamilton set up a central bank mainly to pay down the Revolutionary War debts. But after that, they disbanded the central bank, and currency was issued by banks, by individual banks. And there was the coinage. Well, in the Constitution, I think it's Article 1, Section 10, the United States coins are based on, money was gold and silver. So debts could be satisfied with gold or silver coins. And it was a death penalty offense to counterfeit money. But paper money, of course, the paper money was gold certificates and silver certificates that were issued by banks. So, like the Bank of Kansas City would issue gold certificates and silver certificates, but they had to have the reserves on hand, and people could bring their gold certificates or silver certificates back and exchange them for actual gold and silver coins, and the coins had to be real gold and silver, couldn't be diluted. And it was a death penalty offense to be issuing, fraudulent gold certificates or diluted coins, So it was honest money. And people say, well, the free banking thing was kind of chaotic and there was some corruption. And there's some problems because, auditors couldn't easily get to banks because of transportation issues and so forth. It's not like today, where information can travel very quickly. Information couldn't travel quickly then, but still, the economy was booming in the 19th century. So this idea that we need, a money printing press, and the Keynesian messages, that formulas that we need to have like 2 or 3% inflation, money printing, in order to kind of create velocity of money and to grease the skids of the economy. But in the 19th century, we were on gold and silver standard, and it was a death penalty offense to issue fraudulent diluted coins or fraudulent certificates, gold or silver certificates, and the economy was absolutely booming. Alexis de Tocqueville came over here from France, I think in 1830, 1835, to find out what was going on in America that was just creating all this just booming economy, economic activity. And he wrote Democracy in America. And we didn't have, a money printer. We had just spectacular economic growth. So I don't think that I don't think we need the money printer. I don't think we need 2 or 3% built-in inflation, which is what the Fed targets. So yeah, I just think that's and Thomas Jefferson talked about one of the big failings of the Constitution, though it did address the money with the gold and silver. It didn't really address it kind of in a final way. That Jefferson lamented that the Constitution did not really completely fix the money. There was still corruption and so forth,
Right.
and the government could still, do things that would and there's corruption in the banking also. But Jefferson said that was a big failing, of the Constitution. So even he recognized back then that if you don't have honest money, the whole thing falls apart. And a lot of people recognize that.
I feel like the whole Alexander Hamilton, the musical was like a big psyop to make us like central banking and centralization. It was like,
Yeah.
at the meeting, at the pitch meeting, they were like, we're going to do this musical. It's going to be about Jefferson. It's really hip hop. He's a rebel. And we're going to talk about how we hate, we want gold as money and we hate central banking. And they're like, you're going to do Hamilton. And they just, I don't know. I mean, like, why was this ode to Hamilton all of a sudden, like done in hip hop?
Right.
But I want to ask you, if you could orange pill anyone in the world, who would it be, and why?
Probably Elon, just because he's he's the most successful entrepreneur. He's got such a creative mind. I'm really disappointed that he's pumping Doge. I mean, it just such a failing. It kind of shows a lack of seriousness, frankly, just intellectual seriousness that he would do that. So that's very disappointing to me. It would be helpful if he were really a Bitcoiner, because he is so smart. He's so respected in terms of just his intelligence, and people just assume he knows what he's talking about in terms of technology, and so people will believe him on this Doge stuff.
I could see that. I kind of wanted you to say your daughter Maddie.
Oh yeah, well that would be good. Yeah.
I wonder, you mentioned Peter before. Is he a Bitcoiner? Is he orange pilled, or was it a
Yeah, he's the
dabble?
one that he was the one that told me about Bitcoin.
I know he told you about it, but not everyone sticks with it.
Well, right now he's trying to finish up grad school. He's in psychology, so he doesn't have the money to buy.
But is he
Bitcoin
interested?
right now.
You don't have to buy it to be
Yeah.
interested.
He's definitely so. But I think he just wants. Yeah, he definitely is. Yeah.
Are any of your daughters interested in it?
Not really. Not really.
Is that
I think they're
something you would. I was going to ask, like, how is it, like, maybe, it's one thing when you're young, but like as adults, when maybe you don't agree with them on politics or like money or things like that, or solutions for the world, like how do you deal with that? I mean, is it just a matter of patience?
I think it's a matter of patience. Yeah, I think. Well, I have one daughter who works for a hedge fund in New York City, and so she is economics minded, and she's definitely free market. I think she's intrigued by Bitcoin. I don't know. I haven't really had conversations with her about it. We sort of talk about other subjects besides this. But yeah, I mean, who knows? We'll see on that. My son though is definitely is interested in Bitcoin, likes it. Yeah.
Do you have any girl dad advice?
Girl dad advice. Girls are tough because, especially in teenage years, starting in about middle school, how old are your kids?
One's 11 going on 39, and one's 7 going on 18.
Oh, okay.
11 and
so
7.
They're okay. Yeah. So but girls can be tough because they tend to, especially if they go to public school, they can get they just kind of like to hang out with their friends, and I think for dads it can be tough. So I would say patience. I would say patience. Yeah.
I can imagine. I think especially as they move on to social media and share their lives.
Yeah.
I think I don't know how I'm going to deal with that.
Yeah.
I'm going to do my best, of course.
You say 7 going, but it sounds like your kids are
11 and 7, but the 11-year-old, like I think he's like 97 at heart.
Okay.
And the 11-year-old, she's like going on 16. I mean, the 7-year-old, she's going on 16. I mean, she's like running the house, she's having tantrums, she's
Oh,
telling us what to
okay.
do, and
Oh, okay.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
but
I think
11 and
boys are a
7,
lot
it's
easier to
great
raise.
ages.
Yeah. Boys are a lot easier to raise. A little bit less drama and yeah.
Yeah, I can work with my son a lot easier, get him to do what I
Yeah.
want, and he oblige. And but
The
my my
son
s- my
the
daughter's a sweetheart, but
yeah,
she
the
can be brutal, and she knows what she wants. I mean,
yeah. Yeah.
they both do. But um, I wanted to bring up, in terms of going viral, you got to meet Paula Abdul.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, met her I think in 2006, sort of working on a project with somebody and sort of an advertising type of project. Um, and yeah, she's super nice. She's a very nice lady. Yeah.
Talented. I mean, her songs still come on the radio. I mean, I grew up with her music as a kid,
Yeah.
and it was like she was up there with some of those bands or groups or artists where you'd be like, you like the song, but you can't admit you like the song, or you
Yeah.
do and you don't. And I mean,
Yeah.
I'll be with my brother-in-law and my son in the car, and she'll come on, like a couple of bros hanging out with listening to Paul Abdul. This is great. I mean, it's
Yeah.
still fun music.
Yeah. She's a really nice person.
And then
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
wanted and all the videos I see you breakdancing,
Hmm.
you're rocking the Bitcoin button down.
Oh yeah. That's kind of my
And
trademark.
you're rocking the red Puma sneakers.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's do you just
I
have
don't
an
know.
affinity for the Pumas? Sometimes the Adidas pants, but I
Yeah, the
noticed
Pumas,
the
I do like them
Pumas.
because I for some reason they don't stick too much but don't slide too much. It seems like they've got the right amount of traction. So that's basically why. And it seems like a lot of the breakers use them, and I guess that's why.
Nice.
Yeah, I guess that's why they do
Maybe
seem
you
to
got
be.
switched to orange
They're kind
though.
of light. Well, in that
I don't know if they
model, I think
have
they only
orange
come. I
Pumas.
think they only have like three colors in that model. I think it's red, blue, and white or
Right.
something. Yeah.
I like Pumas. I like Diadoras, but I'm a bit of an Adidas guy at heart.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, Adidas has one that's pretty similar to that shoe. Yeah. So, but yeah, I think Bitcoin. I mean, if you fix the money, you're fixing probably half the problems. You're fixing a big percentage of the problems that are out there. You know, the this. Right now it's pretty hard to retire because you don't know what the cost of tomorrow is going to be, right?
Mm,
Jeff Booth, I think Jeff Booth's book, the cost of tomorrow, and that's absolutely right. You might think you have pretty well set, but you know, if the money printer gets cranked up, that whatever you have can look pretty small. Um, so that retirement really becomes almost out of reach, I would say, for almost everybody. I mean, it's because you don't,
I
not that I
man,
would really retire, but
the
you'd always kind of,
most,
yeah. I
you
mean,
know what?
I will never retire, like, because I always want to be doing
Right.
projects and things, but you don't always want to be doing things for money. You want to be doing things for out of love and passion.
I agree. I would call that semi-retirement for myself, and I look forward to that, and I'm
Yeah.
anxious for that, and I'm hopeful. It's
Like, I don't
retirement's a
write books
strange
to make
thing.
I don't write books to make money. I write them to get a message out.
Sure, no, I
Yeah.
get it, and it's kind
Yeah.
of what I do with the pod, I guess.
Yeah.
But I think thinking in Bitcoin goes beyond like kind of getting price, getting away from the fiat money printer and price exposure to Bitcoin and on seizurability. It's thinking in a denominator that actually works and helps you do better
Hmm.
calculations.
Yeah.
So I recently was witness to a situation where someone was offered like, hey, we'll buy you out of your pension now.
Hmm.
So we'll offer you 100K now
Hmm.
instead of 2 grand a month 10 years from now.
Right.
And if you're thinking in fiat,
Hmm.
you start thinking about 100K now
Right.
versus 2 grand a month for the rest of your life starting in 10 years and what that
Hmm.
can be in fiat. And maybe discounting time value of money.
Hmm.
But if you're thinking in Bitcoin, you're thinking, I can get that fiat now, dump it into Bitcoin,
Right.
and it'll be way more worth than anything I could imagine or get
Right.
out of that vehicle in the future. But you can only get there if you're thinking in Bitcoin. And one of
Hmm.
the most frustrating, I think, aspects of being a Bitcoiner, or I don't want to say being a Bitcoiner, of recognizing that there's this tool in the world that you can use is when you go up to someone and say, hey, I found this new tool, and I'll get, you should learn about it. And they think of it about as, well, that's an expensive tool.
Yeah.
Or, and you're like, no, you should just
No.
you just use this tool. It's free to use as a denominator.
Yeah.
And because at that moment in time, they might not have money for the tool.
Yeah.
But when in the future, when money comes their way, if they're thinking that that tool is valuable, then when that new money comes, they're like, oh, I can put it towards that tool. But if they're not, if they've thrown that thought out, I can't afford it, I don't want to explore it. And then that situation comes arise where they're, again, that given a situation when now they're offered money, they think in fiat terms, and they make a different decision. And that's something that's like I've been realizing over the last, like, I don't know, 6 months. Like, that's what I'm trying to get across now. Like, more than anything is like, think in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
It's not just how much Bitcoin you have.
Yeah.
Because there'll be opportunities to get Bitcoin one day, but if you're not thinking of Bitcoin, you discount those opportunities when they do come your way.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is hard to get out of that kind of fiat mindset, to denominate things in Bitcoin. Like, so I think I saw somebody had a graphic today about, cost of a house in Bitcoin, what the cost, what the cost
Right.
was.
Preston Pish hammers this, and
yeah, how many Bitcoins was a house, and 10 years ago, and how many is it now?
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's right. And but if so, that way you're thinking about, when I save money, I can buy a house one day if I save it in Bitcoin. Whereas the person saving in dollars says, I can't buy a house one day, so I'm going to go out and drink, or I'm going to go out and gamble, or I'm going to go out and just watch a baseball game, or whatever it is, or I'm not going to start a business because it doesn't make sense in dollar terms. Or I'm going to invest in the wrong business because my bank's going to give me some free money, and I think that means that I'm going to be able to turn a profit, go to market with this thing that everyone else will at the same time.
Absolutely.
So my final question for you then, this has been an awesome conversation, is just what do you see amongst young people today? Do you think they're okay with the world? Do you think they're angry? Do you think they want change, or they're just kind of going with the flow and we're going to change it for them and they're looking up to us? I mean, what do you see?
I'm seeing a lot. I'm seeing actually a big change among young people, I think, for the better. Particularly among, maybe not among the youngest group, maybe not among the college people, but or right out of college, but, and I always forget what the generations are, but I'm going to say like the late 20s kind of crowd. My sense is that they are really, they don't like the inflation. They know something is really wrong with the economy. They are not for this woke stuff. The woke stuff has just gone way too far. They're for freedom of thought. They're for freedom. They don't like. So my sense is that there's been a big sea change among the thinking of young people, and it's in the direction of freedom. So, and it's just anecdotal on my part, but I've seen also some surveys that suggest this as well. So it could be that the education, the education indoctrination isn't really working. Once people hit the real world, they start thinking differently. Once they, like with my daughter Maddie, she said, Dad, I kind of misbudgeted. I didn't realize how much taxes were there, how much the amount of taxes that they're coming out of my paycheck. And I'm like, well, welcome to the real world. That's, and so those kinds of things can change people's thinking.
Yeah, I think all kinds of things is going to change. Even maybe where people gather, and whether they have to go to cities when they grow up to find employment, and with the internet and stuff, like whether that will matter.
Well, that's another thing I like about Bitcoin. We talk about the decentralization, right? And of course, Bitcoin is criticized for the use of electricity, and of course, compute power is a key pillar of Bitcoin's security structure. It's essential, but actually, it incentivizes the finding of cheap and free energy. So people are incentivized to power their mining rigs with solar power and hydropower, at the bottom of a glacier. So actually, Bitcoin incentivizes the spreading out of populations. We no longer need to live in population centers and all be reliant on the grid. So actually, it incentivizes the finding of more energy, the creation of more energy, and the spreading out of people into the rural areas, out into the wilderness. No reason to be living. You got your Starlink connection, with Elon's, satellite network, and you've got your mining rig, and you've got your power source, and you're kind of set. There's no real reason to be, in the cities.
Yeah,
So I think
you.
so I think that Bitcoin, the point though is it's important that it incentivizes the spreading out of the population, incentivizes decentralization, more decentralization.
Yeah, sounds good. I love it.
Yeah.
Ben, this has been so dope. I'll leave it to you
Awesome.
for any final words and let people know where they can find you.
Well, you can find me on X at Ben Hart Freedom, actually Ben Hart _Freedom, but I think if you just type Ben Hart Freedom into the search, you'll find me. So please do that, and that would be great. And that's probably the best way to find me, actually. DM me and hang out.
Sounds good. I love it. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Cedric. This is awesome. I like these long-form podcasts.
Yeah, me too. And that's what's up this week with Ben Hart on the Bitcoin Matrix podcast. I hope that you found it as informative and engaging as I did. Hit us up. We'd love to hear your feedback. And thank you for tuning in. Finally, please give the Bitcoin Matrix podcast a 5-star review wherever you listen to your pods. That would really help me get the word out and help new listeners to find the show. Keep building, keep stacking, and always be laser focused out there. This is Cedric. Peace.